Hi, I'm Shannan, and I am back for the third video in my diagnostic series. To recap, if you didn't watch the first two videos, I realized on my own that I was autistic and thought probably ADHD as well, and there's enough family history there, and I took a bunch of clinical assessments and was like, okay, I'm very, very sure that this is the correct diagnosis for me if I was going to go into the system. Well, I wanted to learn as much as I could about myself so that I could maybe come up with some better coping strategies. And I work with kids, and I have tons of kids who have diagnoses, but the adults in their lives, even if they know they have the same traits, they don't, like my generation didn't get diagnosed. So unless you had really high support needs. So I think that it's really helpful for the kids to know adults who say, yeah, I have that too, or I am that too. And to see us out there in the world functioning, to know that the stereotypes they read about are accurate to very few people's experience, and that they also reflect an outsider's view, not the internal experience. So I hired a clinical psychologist to evaluate my brain, and the second conversational assessment went so off the rails that I was just floored. I didn't know what to do, and I asked my therapist to check in with the diagnostician and make sure he wasn't having a mental health crisis. The kind of too long didn't read of this is that the report was as bizarre as the rest of the experience. So the clinical diagnosis was what I was expecting mostly. So autism and ADHD, with a little bit of obsessive compulsive tendencies, not to the point of a disorder, but I think that kind of goes hand in hand with hyperfocus and special interests and autism. But he had my support needs as level 2 for social interactions. And that was really shocking to me because I was worried that I wouldn't even qualify for level 1 because I own my house, I have a job where I'm an executive with a nonprofit. I'm not coming in because I'm in the middle of a crisis. I'm coming in because I recognize patterns of experience and resonate with what autistic people say about their experiences, and recognized that I have had various difficulties around these issues for my whole life. And the experience of getting diagnosed almost sent me into a long-term shutdown. So it was really bad. I was on the edge, kind of. I'd blown my change circuits, but this was almost the tipping point instead of what I had hoped for was a healing point, an insight. So before I say anything else, I do want to just say that my looking at the report and evaluating the report's accuracy and analyzing it and concluding over several weeks, because it took me a while to process it, that he was using the report to excuse his own inappropriate behavior was validated by him. And he also realized that he hadn't listened to a lot of things that I'd said and had really just projected his own bias. I'm not sure how sorry he is or how aware he is of how traumatic that was for me. I really don't know how much of his willingness to be open about this was because I confronted him with one of his colleagues to back me. And I think also because I do have a PhD, and I am someone who a complaint, if I made it, would be listened to and taken seriously. I read through the code of ethics, and I had grounds for an ethical complaint for his conduct during and then what was in the report. I think most of the things that were wrong in the report were more the kinds of copy and paste errors and stereotypes that clinicians who consider themselves experts and are used to dealing with patients who can't push back or aren't confident in representing our own experience. I think that they were pretty normal old school psychology things. I had commissioned the report for me and my therapist, and it was all in third person about me, as though I was not the audience who was paying for it. It's really objectifying to be talked about. Shannan is this, and Shannan is that, and Shannan reports, blah, blah, blah. I'm the audience, talk to me. But that's pretty typical of psychology. It was 12 and a half pages. A lot of the background information was just copied and pasted or retyped from what I had given him, because I'd given him a 37-page document beforehand with my analysis and examples and data points for why I thought I fit the DSM-5 criteria. So there were little inaccuracies. There were also bigger inaccuracies. He said that my pronouns were she, her, but he identified me as non-binary, and I never told him that. I checked female on the box. What had happened was I had explained a kind of basic concept of gender studies, because that's what my PhD is, in about how kind of like woman as a concept doesn't exist, there are only women, like I had explained a concept, an academic concept, and he had thought that because I explained this academic concept that I fit the definition of non-binary gender identity, and so he had decided to gender me himself and did not have any clue that that was not appropriate. And that also is something that I know because he confirmed it. The report had a lot of explaining about what autistic people are like. There were originally no citations for research, and I'm a researcher, so I was like, give me the data on this. And also, like, some of these citations or some of the concepts that he was stating were so out of touch with current research and so biased against autistic people. And the only reason I know that is because I am a trained researcher, and as soon as I realized I was autistic, it became a special interest. And I've probably spent, 600 hours over 3 months studying autism, and listening to autistic people talk about our experiences and things like that. So, like, very quickly, I know how to establish critical expertise. Like, I don't know how to read all of the diagnostic exams and things like that, but I can tell you that I have consumed more content on the subject of autism spectrum conditions than probably most professionals in the last few months. He made a lot of grandiose claims about my inability to see other people's perspectives. And there was a lot of talk about how desperately I try to be a good person, but really can't care about anyone else's happiness and interests other than my own. And he would use it like, it was like that was what he thinks about autistic people. And so he would say that, and then he would give like an example that took what I had told him and then inferred a ripple of responses that I had not said happened, that in fact didn't happen. He also gave examples that had come from when you're seeking an adult autism diagnosis. One of the things that you have to do is show that you've been autistic your entire life, that this is not like a trauma response, because a lot of the characteristics of autism and trauma, there's overlap in the characteristics, though not the cause. And a lot of autistic people are traumatized from living in a world that's really overloading and being misunderstood their whole lives. Anyway, they have to interview a family member. And the forms they use for this are like caregiver parent forms. And when I eventually talked to him, I was like, this is not an appropriate form to use to evaluate someone like me. And we went back and forth a little bit because he's like, no, it's the one you use. And the key was, I'm an independent adult. There is no caretaker, all right? Like, I live alone. I have a lot of coping strategies, and I do struggle with things, but nobody else is seeing what I do for that. So the base assumption that there's someone that will always be right there and live with you as an autistic adult, and that will be taking care of you, and that will know all of the intimate details of how you live your life and how you cope, is completely, like, that's not how it works if you're an independent adult, for any independent adult. So like a parent or a sibling would work for being a kid, but if they're talking about your adult behavior, then unless you have a spouse or a kid that lives with you, like, there's not people that see me most of the time. If I pay my electric bill on time or not, nobody knows it but me and the electric company, right? So that idea that interviewing other people about the behavioral patterns of autistic adults who have lived independently, taking one person's point of view, is really problematic. And it's especially problematic because if you're an undiagnosed autistic adult, then the people that have known you longest are going to have a lot of assumptions they've made about you and about the reasons why you are the way that you are. So anytime you are asking those people for their perceptions are going to be, by default, really biased because they're missing some of the, like, a big piece of the puzzle. So I have a real problem with that. But anyway, so he was using examples that I'm like, I looked at the example and I'm like, that's not even true. Like, there's no basis to that. Someone told him this, and he ran with it without fact-checking. Overall, the report confirmed that he had listened to confirm his bias rather than listen to understand what I was actually saying. This was really concerning because this is a guy who also provides expert testimony in criminal cases involving autistic people. So the report in general seemed quite harsh and like inaccurate and full of bias, but like the diagnosis was what I thought it was, but then the support needs were way higher than I thought. I was like, is he saying that like, obviously I misunderstood his interaction with me, and that was part of why I was level 2 for social things, because I did not misunderstand his interaction with me. Like, it was inappropriate. And then I got to the part where he discussed that interaction, and this is what he said. Shannan understands that she should strive to be friendly to others, even when they treat her poorly. But there are notable references in her history where she does not know how to react to certain behaviors of others. In addition, she reacted vigilantly to the examiner becoming choked up when relating a personal story about his relative and a sexual assault and the effect it's had on him long term. She called her referring therapist immediately following the interview, expressing confusion and fear. Oh, and he had quotes around choked up as well, over the experience with the examiner. So much distress that the referring therapist called the examiner to check on his, quote, well-being. To follow up, Shannan sent an email to her examiner to give suggestions for his diagnostic process. While this is an unusual occurrence, even for the examiner, it is questionable as to whether a call to her referring therapist was the right contact person instead of the examiner. It is also questionable as to whether sending your treating examiner, there's a typo here, as to whether sending your treating examiner should be sent suggestions about his diagnostic process. Shannan appears to have little to no understanding of how others are perceiving her in certain social situations. So first, that's not an accurate representation of what happened. He had a breakdown, and it is not my responsibility to go back to a therapeutic professional who is having a breakdown in front of me and behaving inappropriately when I'm in a vulnerable position, and to manage their trauma. Like, that's like, no, I behaved incredibly professionally. I contacted his colleague. I said, here are the things that worried me. I used proper procedures for contacting her. I didn't call her or text her. I emailed her. I used a protocol we had already devised, like something was urgent. I said, could you check on him? These are the reasons why. I gave her bullet points, and I just said, please let me know, just make sure he's okay, because that was really, really odd behavior. I also had not expressed, confusion and fear. I had said confusion. I was very confused, but he didn't talk to me, so I wasn't sure who he was quoting in this through all of it. Possibly my therapist for having called him. But also he had told me that he really wanted autistic people to talk to clinicians and give our feedback. So I was doing, when I gave him my thoughts on his diagnostic process, I was doing what he had suggested. So all of this happened, and my therapist went on vacation for 3 weeks, so we couldn't really resolve it right away. So that's when I made the first 2 videos. I was thinking about making a third one then with just my initial interpretation of this report, because it was completely off the rails. But I decided to wait until we had the follow-up meeting with him, because I wanted to kind of have closure to the story. There were a lot of other places where he said like broad generalizations about autistic people that again feed into this, like, you didn't really know what happened there. Your perspective is wrong. Individuals is another quote. Individuals on the autism spectrum often have difficulty sharing experiences and emotions with others. As a child, teen, young adult, and now an adult, Shannan appears to really typify this problem, seeming only to be able to care about her own wishes or agenda. While this looks like selfishness in all stages of life on the spectrum, it is really an inability to see others' perspectives and act on that information. Persons on the autism spectrum assume their perspective is the only one, as they cannot read others readily. This feature is known as the empathy deficit in autism spectrum disorder. As an adult, Shannan tries desperately to be a good person, but she still appears to struggle to readily appreciate others' perspectives. He didn't provide any examples of why he thought this was true, or back up his claims about like a general deficit with current research. And I'm going to tell you, I don't experience myself as lacking in empathy or having no ability to see others' perspectives. I work really hard, actually. I have to do it manually because the whole basis of theory of mind, which is the idea that you project from your own experiences in order to figure out others. I'm autistic, so if I project my experience onto others, I'm projecting autistic experience. My theory of mind works well with other neurodivergent people. It does not work well with neurotypical people because they are making decisions and doing things based off of experiences that are so different from mine that I can think them through logically. I can't intuit because we don't share the same processes neurologically. And I really suspected as I read this that I hurt his feelings or embarrassed him when I brought in his colleague, and he was using my report to invalidate my feelings and perceptions by dismissing them as part of my disability and my impaired frontal lobe. Let's talk about my impaired frontal lobe. And the thing is, I do understand manipulation, I do understand lying, I do understand baiting. I have sensory processing issues that impact every aspect of how I experience the world and communicate with others. That's not the same as having an intellectual disability. I don't have that. There's this persistent idea that I see in the literature that autistic people can't lie or don't understand lying. And that's really BS. Like, I understand lying. I choose not to do it. I'm bad at it. I've never made an effort to get good at it because long-term, lying does not serve anyone. It certainly doesn't serve me. The short-term benefits of lying presume that you are processing in the moment, that you can make stuff up on the spot, that you can remember all the things that you just made up, that you can keep that lie coherent over time, and that you can foresee all of the consequences and reactions to that lie and manage them. I don't have the same experience of the world as neurotypical people. If I try to lie to a neurotypical person, it's not going to go well. Okay? It's not going to go well. That is not an effective strategy for me. Also, when people lie to me, because I can't read body language and all the rest, I can't tell they're lying. Like, it's really, really hard for me. So why would I do that to another person? Like, it's not an incapacity. It's an inefficiency. Like, why would I do that? It makes no sense. It's not an effective strategy. Another portion of the report had made me wonder if he was able to be objective. He really wasn't listening when I explained my process for things, when I had corrected him about his assumptions about my process. So this is another quote. Black and white thinking is a common characteristic of an autism spectrum disorder. One can easily observe Shannan's intense and inflexible thinking. She is interested in only what she enjoys and her happiness. She is naive at times and expresses complete belief that certain things will make her happy. As Shannan stated it during one of our interviews, her thinking works the opposite of others sometimes. She will come up with the answer and build support for that answer, inductive reasoning, while many others prefer deductive reasoning, considering all the possibilities and narrowing those possibilities down until you arrive at the answer. First of all, that's not what inductive reasoning is and deductive reasoning. He's confused them. And he appeared to be attributing his own biased deductive reasoning to my processes. Basically, autistic people are rigid, black and white thinkers. Therefore, my patient is coming up with explanations for things and proving them through confirmation bias. I told him repeatedly that I extrapolate from the specific to the general. So inductive reasoning is the first stage in the scientific process. So it's observe and hypothesize, okay? And then I have processing delays. I collect information and absorb it in the moment. Sometimes my attention glitches and I miss things, but I don't filter the things that I remember the way that a neurotypical person might. I remember details that strike me as important rather than form an overall impression and kind of forget the details. Okay, so it's a different kind of brain pattern. My brain then integrates that data into patterns while I sleep. Like, this is the processing delay. So usually it happens when I sleep or if I take a break, just something where I'm not trying to process in the moment. That gives my brain time to process things that happened previously. So I will kind of collect everything, take a break to process it, and then have a theory about how it all comes together. I'll have a pattern that I've kind of discerned in the data. And then I'll test that pattern against objective reality. So does my theory hold with new information that's coming in? And in that case, I apply deductive reasoning. So this is my idea, and if I apply that idea to the data, does it still hold? And then I continually revise my hypothesis or my theory based on whether the results continue to hold. I do not come up with answers out of nowhere. I've spent almost 2 decades training and researching and writing to try to figure out why my brain's so different from so many of the people around me. The kind of close of the report was just like watch some YouTube videos and read books by autistic people, which is how I ended up in his office. And the level 2 supports, there was nothing about why they were level 2 social supports or why what they should be. Like, what, if I'm that bad with people, what help could I get? His final recommendations really felt a lot more like condescension. Like, he did switch to direct address, and he was like, learn to be flexible, Shannan. Things are harder for you than they are for other people. And I was like, so I'm the audience. So why is this whole thing written about me as though I'm just the subject of study, the object of study? So I had 3 main kind of critiques right off the bat, and one was, it's not empathy that I lack, it's sympathy. I think that my feelings and experience are just as important as the examiner's, and given the power dynamic in our interaction, that my behavior was more appropriate to the interaction, and that when he wrote about his breakdown in my report as proof of my disability, that he really showed his hand in that. I was also really pretty sure that my rigid and inflexible thinking in applying patterns to figure things out is just a conscious version of what neurotypical people do automatically in their brain. I just have to do it slower. My versions are no more or less right than the automated versions in and of themselves. However, because mine are conscious, they do actually take in information that's counter to things that my presuppositions. So they actually, it's a little easier to catch bias. Doesn't mean I don't have bias, but it's a little bit easier to catch those moments of bias because I'm doing it consciously. But this makes neurotypical people really uncomfortable. It rocks their world, and it also shows their rigidity and their bias when I point those things out. So yeah, it makes people really uncomfortable. It's a social challenge that I have to navigate, but it's not that I'm wrong necessarily. Using systems and patterns is a really healthy adaptive mechanism to hardwired sensory processing differences that render social knowledge inaccessible to brains like mine, because in practice, the conscious patterns are more flexible, not less flexible, because they can be adapted based on new data and intervened in rationally. And if you're going to use like a single data point as evidence for a totalizing claim like Shannan is incapable of seeing other people's perspectives, you should probably get my perspective on the incident as well, because I don't know if you know this, but people lie and leave out the parts of the story that make them look bad. So basically, I sent all the correspondence to my therapist, who I'd asked to be at the session with him, and she did her own kind of read through of everything and asked him to cite research for different things, and made a point of saying where there were moments where she was like, I don't think that's not accurate to my experience of Shannan over the last several years of working with her. And then I went through the report, and what I did to advocate for myself, and I really wasn't sure how to do this at first, because like going through and saying, bias, this is dumb, like that, nobody's gonna listen to that. Right? Like, that's not gonna make a psychologist think that they maybe should rethink their claims. It's just gonna make me look like angry and hysterical, right? Instead, what I did is I went through, like, I pointed out all the factual errors and clarified. And then any place where he interpreted something from my life and I felt like he was interpreting it through the lens of bias and not through what I had told him or what I think the facts of the situation are, I just added my perspective. So I said, please add here, Shannan reports in her perspective, and then I gave my perspective. So, because there were things that he was saying that I was like, the research that suggests this is really, really old, and has already been intervened in. So like there's already data that supports my position on this. The double empathy problem, the dialectical misattunement hypothesis, the research coming out of Japan on predictive coding. So I knew a lot of research that he was either unfamiliar with or had not absorbed or taken seriously because of his own preconceptions about autistic people. So I just added my perspective throughout and said, Shannan reports that this is not how she perceives it. She perceives it this other way. So I did it in third person because whatever. And then we had the meeting, and I was really anxious about the meeting. And that's honestly why it took so long for me to do this video, is because it took me several weeks to kind of recover from the meeting itself. But basically what happened was we sat down and he acknowledged what he'd done. He said he'd never had an experience like that. He'd never behaved like that before. He had kind of gone into denial about it, and it was clear that he'd gone into denial because he was really ashamed of himself, and he could see it in how he'd written my report. I was not expecting that. I was primed to fight, and it's really hard for me to fight. I have a hard time talking when I'm in a conflict situation or my emotions are really high. So I've written pages and pages and pages of notes and prepped with my therapist. And I was like, I'm going to stand up for myself. And he just was like, yeah, I behaved badly and I'm sorry. I will make all of the changes that you've requested. So yeah, I think that a good portion of the reason it went down that way was, again, privilege. I'm a white woman with a PhD. I have a lot of connections in the medical community that he is a part of. And my therapist is very well known in the regional community he is a part of. And so I had a witness, and I had documented everything. And I was able to push back with my own research. It felt more like he threw himself on the mercy of the court than that he fully could be trusted not to do it again. My therapist went for me to get a price reduction because I was now paying 2 people for the same time. So she got that, so I actually ended up paying less than I had planned. He did correct the report. Level 1 support needs, lots of resources. It became really clear to me throughout this that diagnosticians are not the people who are going to be able to help late diagnosed autistic adults. They don't know how we cope. They don't know effective strategies, not really. They're used to working with kids to make them easier to deal with, at least in the experience that I had. And undiagnosed adults have coping strategies which are more or less effective. Those of us who are not coming in to get diagnosed because we've suddenly lost the ability to function, that we don't have a job anymore, or our lives have blown up, that's a really biased sample set. They're not talking to those of us who are managing and coping. Because my life looks really good from the outside. If I didn't tell you the areas where I struggle, you wouldn't know unless I go into a major burnout, which has happened previously. And in that case, I think anybody would have been able to say, yeah, she is not okay. But that was dismissed as grief, not autism. So anyway, the main thing that I wanted to kind of close with is that I had heard people say that autism science was kind of in the state of the same place where understandings of LGBT lives and identities and experiences were about 50 years ago. And I've taught studies in sexuality, so I've taught that history. So that has a really specific meaning to me when I hear that. There's a base understanding that the representation of autism is really biased and is wrong, is really, really limited to a small sample set and isn't accurate to the larger population. There are way more autistic people than can get caught in the net of the current guidelines. But knowing that and having all the different people who are autism experts actually really understand that, having families understand that, having regular people understand that, we're not there. Adults going through this process are in a really vulnerable place because we're trying to demonstrate our autism in ways that basically mean catering to biases as opposed to actually sharing our experience. And I think that's really hard and it's really fucked up, but it is what it is. So the biggest things that were really helpful for me in my diagnostic process were the document that I had compiled beforehand, where I listed out all of my data points as I thought that they fit the DSM-5 criteria, and explained the resources and research that I had done ahead of time that made me come to this conclusion. And then involving my normal therapist in the process, and when it went off the rails, and saying, I would like you to be in the room with me for this. I think it's really, really important if you're a delayed processor that you have somebody else who's also in the situation to help you and advocate for yourself. Even if you're super independent. I am really, really capable, but that is basically the worst situation you can put me in. And then add your perspective. Fight to add your perspective to your report, because you're the person who knows you best. And don't let somebody else's biases around autism be the things that define you, because I'm going to be real clear. I don't think they know what they're doing. They're not there yet. I'm hopeful we can help them get there and make it better for the kids that follow. But that's it. Thanks for joining me. I will probably make more videos, but not gonna set a particular schedule for now.